Hey everyone, today we'll be learning about cells, kind of our next big unit here, cells. So take a look at cells real quick. You can see there are thousands and thousands of different types of cells. Not thousands, maybe hundreds of different types of cells. A whole bunch here on the screen. You can see blood cells, nerve cells, kind of cool, right? Here's just some more examples of cells that you can see. So different parts of our body, different types of cells, different function, different form, right? So that's kind of how we look at cells. There are some things all cells have in common we'll be looking at here. And then we're looking at kind of the parts and function of cells as well. So kind of things you need to know is what does each part of the cell do and where to find it in a cell. Okay, so that's kind of the big ideas. First, we're going to talk about cell theory. How do we discover the cell? Okay, basically cells are so small, we had to create microscopes in order to find them. And so Anton von Leeuwenhoek here was the first to kind of create a microscope to help us discover cells. Right? And he called these cells wee beasties, which is kind of just a fun little fact there. Not going to make you memorize this, but just kind of cool. As a bunch of people kind of helped our understanding of cells. Here they are. Hooke was a big one, looking at cork and whatnot, and a bunch of other people discovered cells in other like organisms, plants, and animals. Okay, and so basically from that we get the cell theory. Okay, so one, we know that all living things are composed of at least one cell. Okay, they're the basic structure we have of every living organism, right? They're like the basis we have to be alive. Okay, and we also know that then cells can only come from existing cells. They don't just appear or anything like that. They have to come from another cell. And we learn about that in mitosis, which you'll learn about in Tri B. Okay, there are a couple things cells need to do every day. We talk about proteins, like they need to make proteins, right? They need energy, either make it and use it or just use it. They need to make more of themselves, okay? Whether they are unicellular, one cell, or if they're multicellular, composed of many cells, they need to kind of reproduce more cells, okay? Kind of cruising on here, cells are made of a bunch of different things, but they're really small, right? And so the stuff in there is even smaller. So that's why that microscope kind of came into play. So you can kind of see here, right? Actually, let's get the better pictures. There's a better picture coming. Here we go, right? We have scale here. Cells, right, kind of exist here in this area, right? And you see like that, and these are the cells we'll be talking about, bacteria and animals. So the bacteria are prokaryotes. These are the eukaryotes. But the smallest cells we have are prokaryotic cells. You can see they're super tiny, right? And then the largest we have are the eukaryotic cells. But cells are really small. And the cool thing here is cells are small because the smaller they are, the faster they can work. Things can get in and out a lot faster than just they are really big. Like if you had to walk through a giant city, it would take you a lot longer than walking through a small little city. Okay. So the cool thing is like large animals aren't made of bigger cells; they're just made up of more cells. Okay. So that's kind of how we look at cells and cell size. We're going to focus on now are organelles. And organelles are little organs or little things inside of cells. Okay. Organelles are only found in eukaryotic cells, so they're only found in those cells that are super complex. Okay. An organelle is something that does a specific task. Okay, so you guys probably all know the mitochondria, right? The energy, the powerhouse of the cell. But mitochondria is the only thing that does that. Okay, so it's very specialized in what it does. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about different types of cells real quick. Okay, so we have prokaryotic and eukaryotic. I've been saying these for a couple slides now. Prokaryotic cells are really small, super simple. Okay, they have DNA, but it's like circular DNA, right? So it kind of just like this, right? But it's all in a jumbo, okay? And so it's just in cell space. They sometimes have extra DNA, which we call plasmid, okay? And then they don't have a whole lot else going on, right? These things are usually unicellular, meaning one cell. So unicellular is one cell, okay? And they will divide in order to make more of themselves, and that's what they do in order to divide. Eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, are super complex, high-level organisms, right? Things, plants, animals, fungi, stuff like that. They have a lot of organelles that perform tasks, and then they all have to work together. Their DNA is more linear, right? So they're more like that. There's a lot of it, right? And that hangs out in what we call the nucleus, which we'll be learning about here in just a second. So kind of think about prokaryotic versus eukaryotic, right? Very different things. but we have some things in common. I'll talk about in just a second here. So here's prokaryotic, small, simple. Eukaryotic cell is very complex here, right? A eukaryotic cell is very complex with a lot of things going on, right? Here's just another example of a prokaryotic. All right, that prokaryotic cell that you can see, right? So again, not a ton going on, a little bit more in this picture than the last one, but they have some stuff on the outside that helps them move, some DNA on the inside. But again, still super simple when you're looking at prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. Okay, another cool example. Here are some of our eukaryotic cells. So here we have a plant cell on the right. Here's an animal cell, and we'll get into the difference between plant and animal cells in a while. But those are eukaryotic, super complex, a lot going on. Here's all cells have some things in common. They all have genetic material, right? Like DNA. Okay, so they all have DNA. They all have this like fluid called cytoplasm, some type of fluid in that kind of holds stuff in place. They all have a plasma membrane, which is an outside covering, and they all have ribosomes. Okay, and we'll talk about what these things do and their role in our cells in just a second. Let's talk about the cell membrane first. Cell membrane is the outer layer that allows things in and out of the cell. Okay, so some can go in, some can go out. It kind of depends on a lot of different factors, whether it can go in or out. Okay, but it's really cool because it helps us maintain our internal environment. It's made of a lot of different parts. It's a fluid mosaic model, means it moves and it's made of a bunch of different parts. Okay, one of those big things we talked about this in our macromolecule units are the phospholipids. So phospholipids, right? Phosphate head, lipid tail. So you can see in this picture, right? We have this phosphate head, which is the circle, and the tails are the lipids, right? Again, the phosphate we talked about is hydrophilic. It likes water, so it goes to the outside. The lipids we talked about were hydrophobic. They don't like water, right? Fats don't like water, so they go to the inside. And it forms a bilayer. So there's two layers with the hydrophobic parts in the middle, the hydrophilic parts on the outside, and that is why it protects, right? So we have like a water kind of outside environment and a water inside environment, and it protects it, right? So the outside is protected from the inside because of this design, the phospholipid bilayer. There are a few other parts of the cell membrane. I'm not going to make you memorize these, but just kind of that mosaic part. There's cholesterol, there's proteins, and there's carbohydrates. They all have some specific job. All right, that job again, we're not going to get into it right now, but allows it to like allow certain things in and out of the cell, or allows it to kind of help it keep its fluidity. Okay, here's this cool picture of the phospholipid bilayer, the cell membrane there. Some other parts of the cell, we have the cell wall, and the cell wall is only in plants and fungi. So I'm going to like circle that so you guys remember, only in the plants and fungi. Animal cells like you and I do not have a cell wall. Okay, it is just outside the cell membrane. So if I were to draw, you can see this right here on the cell. That part's the cell membrane. And outside a rigid area then is the cell wall. It's a protective barrier, and it helps it give the plant shape. Okay, so that's kind of the role that the cell wall is playing. Within the cell, now we have our nucleus. The nucleus is the control center. Okay, that's where the DNA is located. If it's a eukaryotic, it's linear. If it's, the DNA is linear if it's a eukaryotic cell, but it's hanging out in the nucleus, right? And it's the directions, right? The DNA is the directions for the cell. So really important that it's protected. Okay, the nucleus has this double membrane around it, and there's nuclear pores, which can then allow stuff to enter and leave the nucleus if needed. Okay, and then kind of within the nucleus is the nucleolus, which is where ribosomes are kind of created. And I'll show you a picture here to help explain that. So looking at our cell, generally, again, thinking about identification, this giant thing, it's almost always the biggest thing is the nucleus. Okay, so that's within that, you can see this dark area, right? That's the nucleolus. That's where ribosomes are made. All these lines, right, you can kind of see some of these. I'll see if I can trace them. I'm not very good at tracing, but all of those, right, are the DNA. So that's all DNA, and it's in there. So you also have these nuclear pores. So if the DNA or something had to leave or enter, I could do that through those nuclear pores. Okay, kind of cool. Next up, we have ribosomes. Talk about ribosomes were being made in the nucleolus, right? Ribosomes make proteins. Okay, so they are aid in making proteins. Okay, They can be attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, or they can be free floating. And we'll talk about like their exact role in making proteins when we get to our DNA unit. But ribosomes help make protein. Kind of moving on here, endomembrane system. The endomembrane system consists of the ER, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, and lysosome. And all of these basically control proteins and metabolic functions. Okay, so we're going to talk about the endomembrane system right now. So the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER, as it's also referred to, there are two kinds, rough and smooth. The rough has ribosomes on it, the smooth does not. Easy differentiation, okay? It's a superhighway of the cell, so it helps make things allow traveling kind of throughout the cell, right? The smooth ER has some extra special things going on too. It helps detox, right? So like think about an organ, liver that detoxifies, right? It has a lot of smooth ER in there, okay? It's kind of its job. The rough ER is a different job. It has the ribosomes on it, which makes it rough. So when those ribosomes make the proteins, the rough ER packages them, puts them in little vesicles, these little travel things, and then sends them to our next part, the Golgi, okay? And so the smooth, right, will also like make vesicles, and it detoxifies, but the rough, right, has the ribosomes, which makes proteins, and then it will put those transport those proteins to wherever it needs to go, okay? Which brings us to the Golgi. The Golgi looks like pancakes. So if you see my picture here, right, like here's the nucleus, right, N for nucleus. Right outside the nucleus, almost always, is the endoplasmic reticulum. And this other thing down here that looks like a stack of plates or pancakes, they might call it, that's our Golgi. Okay, the Golgi apparatus, or Golgi body, is what it's called. Okay, they take those vesicles from the ER, suck them in, modify the proteins that are in there, right? So they kind of go through, modify the proteins, and then they ship them out. And those proteins can do a couple things. They can leave the cell, or they might be used in the cell. Okay, so there's a couple different roles there. But the Golgi will modify, right? So kind of the big key here is they modify and ship and package those proteins up. Okay, and they do that by means of vesicles. Some other endomembrane system stuff, we have lysosomes, which we talked about in our catalyst lab. They break down things. Okay, so they have those digestive enzymes like catalase that'll break down stuff. Same thing with peroxisomes. Okay, do the same thing. They break down, and they just have this membrane around them, so they like suck in toxins and they'll break it down. So here's just a cool picture of our endomembrane system, right? So you got nucleus, ER, takes those proteins, Golgi sucks them in, and then they do stuff, right? They go out of the cell, they go into the cell, depending on what the protein is. Here's our lysosome. You can see it's engulfing, right? It's breaking down this old mitochondria, doesn't be needed anymore, so it's going to break it. Here, some food got taken in, and it's going to use that food. It's going to help break down that food and bring it to where it needs to go. So those are lysosomes. All right, some other kind of organelles we have is the vacuole. Vacuoles are only really found in plants, okay? These are like giant storage areas, okay? So they're going to store water and food and stuff. Now, if you see like a plant cell, there's a big giant space you can kind of see right here. That is your vacuole. Doesn't look like much, but it's your vacuole. Every cell has these mitochondria. Mitochondria known as the powerhouse of the cell. But what's happening is here, they're breaking down like glucose into energy. Okay, and that energy has to be cellular energy, so we call it ATP, just cellular energy. And it kind of looks like this thing that like, if you like see a picture of it, looks like a bean with like these little squiggly lines. Like that's how we draw mitochondria, right? So it's doing respiration, which is basically taking sugar, glucose, breaking it down into energy. And so that's why we say it's the powerhouse, because it helps create or convert sugars into energy. Chloroplasts are the other kind of one you probably have heard about. Again, only plants here, right? Their chloroplasts are only in plants. They're the site of photosynthesis. So they're going to take the sun's energy, draw me a sun. My son, he's wearing sunglasses because he's bright. And the sun's energy, smiling, goes into the chloroplast, right? It goes through, does its thing, and out you get C6H12O6, which is glucose, right? So it takes sun's energy, makes it into glucose. Cool thing, if you're a plant, you can take that glucose, put it into mitochondria and use it right away. If you're an animal, you have to like eat that. So we eat plants to get that food chain stuff, right? So chloroplasts, there's those things. When drawn, kind of look like this with these stacks, right? So these stacks are grana. They're just a bunch of little things. So that's what our chloroplasts look like. Other organelles are plastid. Plastids are organelles that are like help manufacture or store food. Okay, so chloroplasts are technically a plastid. Some other ones are chromoplasts, which are they will be the other colors you see. So if you see like a yellow flower, that's just a chromoplast in there making it yellow. Tomatoes, right? They're red, so they have these other chromoplasts, and so they just make it. Right, so here's like a tomato plant actually, right here. That you can see the red in it. Okay, that's a chromoplast. The other ones are leucoplasts. Leucoplasts are starch storage. So we talked about that with potatoes when we did the calories lab, and with the starch as a polysaccharide as well. So leucoplasts, starch storage. Some other organelles or parts of the cell, cilia, flagella, these are things that help move a cell. Right? Generally, unicellular organisms have these. Cilia, right down here, you can see all over, right? Those are cilia. Those are cilia. They help move it. They're all over, little hair-like things. The flagella are these things up here, right? So you can have like a few like long tails, and they just kind of whip around to help move cells. Okay, so these paramecium down here have them. Cilia help move the cell, and those guys up there have flagella. Other parts, cytoskeleton. Cytoskeleton is just the framework of the cell. There's a lot of different parts here, microtubules and microfilaments and things like that. Basically, it's providing structure for our cell so it doesn't collapse. Okay, these microtubules and microfilaments will also help move things kind of throughout the cell a little bit as well. And then very specialized, we have centrioles. Centrioles are only in animal cells. Okay, so if you look and see like a cell dividing, that's because of centrioles. All right, so centrioles are what helps in our cell division. Those are all the organelles, right? So let's talk real quick about what makes a plant cell different than an animal cell. All right, so plant cells, I talked about, have a few things. They have a cell wall, they have chloroplasts, and they have large vacuoles. They really don't have lysosomes because vacuoles will do that job, or sometimes peroxisomes will. So they don't really have lysosomes. Now, animal cells don't have any of those things, okay, but they have everything else. So they have only the cell membrane, right? They really don't have, actually, I want to cross out, they like don't have vacuoles, okay? But they do have centrioles and they do have lysosomes, where again, plants really don't have that. Otherwise, everything else is the same. Think about nucleus, nucleolus, ER, smooth ER, all that, those are all the same, okay, in plants and animals. So kind of look in here, here's a nice animal cell. I know it's an animal cell because I see centrioles, that kind of gives it away. But I also notice there's no cell wall, right? So the shape is really kind of fluid in an animal cell because of that. Other thing I just want to point out real quick, right? Big thing in the middle, nucleus. Right outside the nucleus, I'm going to label that nucleus. Right outside the nucleus, we have our ER. Oh, right here looks like a stack of pancakes. I'm going to name that Golgi. This looks like that bean-looking thing I drew. That's the mitochondria. So again, kind of just thinking about, you're going to need to identify stuff. What do these look like? Where are they located? All right, so that's kind of the key there. Here's our plant cell, right? Large vacuole. Look at that thing, large vacuole. Right? Look at this really thick thing on the outside cell wall. Ooh, there you go. Here's your chloroplast. So again, kind of identifying, being able to identify stuff. That's a plant cell because of those big key things. Just cool side by side, plant versus animal. Again, a lot of things are similar. A few things are different. Okay.